Okay, in this video, we are going to be building a star rating system with PHP. Now, we're not actually going to be using stars, we're going to be using numbers 1 to 5, but it's essentially the same thing. You can represent these with images, and you can do pretty much what you want with them. Now, we are storing articles in a database here as an example. This can be anything though, it really doesn't matter what data you are storing. You can see here we've got an ID and a title within here. Notice we don't actually have a rating stored along with this article. You'll notice we've got the rating here though. That's because we're actually storing the rating inside of another table, this article's ratings table. And this gives us the opportunity to store additional data along with each rating that's given. And what we're doing here, this 3 out of 5 you can see for Article 1, is actually an average of all the ratings that have been stored here. And you can see that just glancing at these, that is pretty much 3. So let's take a look at how this actually works. I've created a very basic system that won't take a minute for us to do, that basically links through to each of the articles given an ID. So I'm inside of article.php here, whereas previously I was on the index page. So if I wanted to rate article 2 and give that a 5, you can see the rating automatically changes to a 5. Now if we take a look inside of the article ratings table, you can see that we've got an article of 2 and we've given this a rating of 5. Now if we do another one, let's just say 1, that then brings the average in obviously at 3. We are rounding these values because we're using, it will be getting back a float here. So you can see here that we've got a article 2 and a rating of 1 there, which brings it to the average of 3. So that's basically what we're going to be doing. As I said, this can work with any content. So let's go ahead and start building this. So we're starting this pretty much from scratch. The only thing I have here is a basic document markup. You don't really have to even include this if you don't want to, but I'm just including it anyway. Now, inside of our database, we're going to need to add 2 tables. Now, I'm under the database name website, so when we connect using MySQLi, we'll need to provide the fact that we're connecting to this website database. So let's create our first table. This is going to be articles, and you can use anything to create these tables. You can use the command line PHP myadmin, but in this case I'm using SQL Pro. So under the structure, we want to add the ability for storage of a title, and let's just add a varchar here, and we'll give this a length of 200. You can, like I said, be applying this to pretty much anything. The concept works exactly the same. As long as you're outputting content, it'll work the same. So let's create a new table, and this is going to be the ratings for these articles. So this is going to be called articles_ratings. So inside of here, we want to be able to provide the article, as we saw a moment ago, and then the rating. Now both of these are going to be integers, so we can just keep them the same. You can adjust the lengths if you want, but I'm going to leave this out for now. So now that we've created our database tables, that's all we need to do, but I'm going to add a couple of test articles just in here. So we'll say test article 1, and here we'll say test article 2, and in here we'll say test article 3. Perfect. So starting off with our blank index file, let's actually create a new folder within the directory that we're working in. I'm going to call this app, and inside of here I'm going to create a new PHP file, and I'm going to call this init.php. This will just be my initialization file that allows me to connect to my database. So let's create the database connection first, just so we can use this on every single page. So we're going to create a new MySQLi instance, and we're going to connect to localhost. We're going to connect to root, or using the username root, using the username password, and the 4th argument is the database. In this case, mine is website. Okay, so let's grab all articles, just so we can output these. Again, we don't really need to do this here. In fact, we could probably do this on the index page. That might make a little bit more sense. So inside of index, let's open and close some PHP tags up here, and let's require in that initialization file. So now anywhere down here we can actually use that db instance that we created in this file. So what we need to do in here is we need to fetch all articles. So I'll just comment this, all articles. So I'm going to say query, and this is going to be DB. We're going to be using the query method here. And just for now, we are going to change this later. We're going to select, let's select everything from the articles table, just so we can output these below. We're not pulling in the rating yet from that other table, but we're going to wait till we insert ratings before we come back and fix this up. So we can basically just come back and fix this up later. So here what we're going to do is a quick while loop, and basically what this is just going to do is it's going to add all of these articles to an array. You can actually use the fetch all method, and that will bring you all results back. By default, you'll have to loop through this and either output within this while loop, which I wouldn't recommend, or store them into a variable that then you can pass to what is effectively your view. So in here, let's access that query that we have up here, and we're going to fetch these as an object just to keep things nice and clean and consistent. And in here, I'm going to append to an articles array. And what we can actually do is, if we want, we can just say articles and assign this an empty array. If you're using an older version of PHP, you might need to use the array keyword. So now that we have that, let's do a quick print R on articles and see what we have. So a quick refresh, and there we go. So we've now got an array. Inside of this, we've got an object, so we can access the ID, the title of the articles. Perfect. So what we want to do now is just loop through these, just so we can actually output these. So down here, we need to create a for each loop. So this is the shorthand syntax, just probably better for doing within a view. And we're going to say for each articles as article. Now let's quickly end this for each loop. So end for each. And inside of here, let's just create some markup. You don't need to do this, and this isn't styled. I'm not pulling in a style sheet, but I'm just going to call this article. Inside of here, I'm going to have an H3, and basically this is just going to contain the article title. So let's just output this. So let's echo article title. Let's preview this. Let's just take a look here. Okay. There we are. Let's just fix that up. Articles as article. And there we go. So we've got our 3 articles there. And down here, let's create a div element just with a article rating. And we'll say rating X out of 5. We'll fill this in later. Now, what we also want is this title to link through to a page. So let's wrap this in an anchor. And for the href, let's say article.php, and we'll say ID equals, and then we want the ID to go here. So we open and close our PHP tag, and we echo out article ID. So now what we actually have is, if I just view the page source, you can see that we've got ID of 1, ID of 2, and ID of 3. That's then going to link through to article.php ID of 1. We don't have this page available yet, but what we want for this page is just to say, here's the article, let's fetch that specific article, and then give the user the ability to click 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and then go through to the rate.php page, which we'll be creating as well. So let's create this article.php page so we can take the next step. So we create article.php inside of our main directory, and I'm basically just going to take what we have from here, just because I want to copy the markup. I'm going to get rid of all of this because we don't need it, and I'm going to get rid of all of this as well, and I'll just change that to singular. So inside of this file, what we need to do is we need to take the ID from the get superglobal, and then we need to put this into a query and pull back all of the information for that specific article. So the first thing I want to do is just say article equals null, and I'm going to do a quick check to say, is this key of ID available in my get superglobal? And if it is, I'm going to store it inside of a variable here, and like that. Now what I'm going to do is, this is really, really important for security, I'm going to cast this to an integer. What we do is we cast it to an integer, so when we put it into the query, we're never going to have things like single quotes that might cause an SQL injection attack. So let's just do a quick test to echo this out, just so you understand where this is coming from. So when I click test article 1, we get the result of what's passed through to here. For 2, we get the same, and 3, you get the idea. So what we can actually do now is pick up the article and then display it below, along with the ability to rate that article. So let's say article, and again we'll do a query, so we use the query method, and in here let's say select, let's do this in double quotes actually, because we're going to be putting a variable into this, and what we'll actually do is we'll do the same for the index page as well, just to keep things consistent. Okay, so inside of article.php, back to this, let's select, we'll select everything from this, so select everything from articles where ID equals, and then we just give the ID in square brackets like this. We don't need to do that, but I'm just using this syntax. So now that we have this article, we obviously just want to fetch it straight away. We don't need to loop here because we've only got one record. So I'm going to fetch this as an object, so I can go ahead and I can return this like so. And this will now give me all of the properties of that article. So let's take a look at outputting this down here. I'm going to start off with an if statement. I'm just going to say if article. Remember, we set article to null up here, so if this is not set, we won't see anything in the body. You can, chop and change this depending on your requirements. I'm going to end that if statement there, and inside of here I'm going to create a div with a class of article. Again, none of this is styled, we're just containing it just in case we might want to style it. So I'm going to say this is article, and then in double quotes here, I'm going to give the name of the article. So we already have that up at the top. So I'm going to say article title. And then down here, I'm going to say exactly the same as I did with the articles on the home page. I'm going to say article rating. I'm going to say rating is X out of 5. And then now we are going to give the links that allow the user to vote. So I'm going to encase this in another div, and this time I'm going to give it a class of article rate, just to, well, that assumes that the user is then going to rate. So I'm going to say rate this article. Now, I could generate lots of anchors here, and say you had a 10-point rating system, which you can absolutely do with this. You would have to write a lot of markup. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to use a for each loop, and I'm going to end this for each down here. Now inside of the for each loop, I want to generate an array with numbers 1 to 5. You could use a for loop for this, but in this case it's a little quicker, not in terms of the actual speed of it, but it's quicker to write, and it's also probably quicker to understand at a first glance. So here we're saying for each range 1 to 5, so basically for 1 to 5, as rating now equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for each iteration of the loop. So in here we're going to create an anchor. So here we can just output rating like so. Let's just take a quick look at what this looks like. You can see here we've got the article title, which we expected, rating X equals X over 5, which we know is just test, and we've got these 5 here now. So we know that this works. Now let's create the anchor for actually rating. So it's rate.php, we'll create this in a moment, and I'm going to say article equals, and then I'm going to open, and I'm going to say rating, like so. So now what's actually happened is, if we take a look at the page source, you've got article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can go through to this rate.php page, and we can say article equals what? Oh, sorry, this needs to be rating equals the rating. And in here, we're going to say article equals X, and then and because we're sending multiple values along with this query string. And in here, we're going to echo out article ID. So I confused myself there. So this is how it should look. We've got article 1, article 1, article 1, article 1, article 1, and rating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll be checking that we are within the bounds of how many, what score we can give this in a moment when we create rate.php. So let's now move on to creating rate.php. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to take the article ID and it's going to take the rating, and then it's going to just put that into that article's ratings table. So this is rate.php. Let's just open this. We need to require in app init.php file, basically because this contains our database functionality, so this is really important. The first thing we want to check here is if the article exists in the query string, or the key exists in the get superglobal, and we can comma separate these. So we're basically checking if article and rating are set here. Now you might want to check if they actually exist. So for example, if they're not empty. But in our case, what we're actually going to be doing in this file is we're going to be checking if that rating is within 1 and 5. And we're also going to be checking if that actual article exists. So if it's not provided, it won't be inserted anyway. So you don't really need to worry about that empty check. So the article now, let's store that in a variable here. That's just article. Again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be casting these to integers. And that's really important, again, because we are inserting here. We're placing these variables into a query, which is then likely to result in an SQL injection attack. So we've got our article and our rating stored. Let's now check if the rating is within 1 and 5. So we could do complex if statement here, but we're just going to use the in-array function to our advantage. We're going to pass in what we're checking for, and then using the shorthand syntax, again, if you're using an old version of PHP, you may need to use array. We're going to check 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that checks if the rating is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, basically. Now we want to check if the article that's provided actually exists. So I'm going to create a variable called exists, and I'm going to query the database. And in here, I'm going to say select ID. I'm just selecting ID for the sake of it. You don't need to select ID. It can be any field from articles where ID equals article. And then from this, we're going to bring the num rows. Now you could do something like num rows true else false like this. This is just a shorthand or ternary if statement and or ternary operator. So we're basically saying exists equals, if this is a positive number, then this is true, otherwise this is false. But you can just use the number that's returned here. So now what we can do is we can say if exists, and in here we can do our query to insert that. So here we're going to say insert into articles ratings, that's the table name, remember. Here we're going to choose the columns that we want to insert into, so article and rating, and then we're going to choose the values. So in this case, X and Y, we can just replace these. Remember, we are inserting the article and then the rating. So here we'll say article, and in here we'll say rating like that. And that's it. Now the last thing we want to do is just down the bottom, I'm going to relocate the user to the article that they came from. So I suppose we could do that within here, then we have access to the article. Obviously, if the user doesn't provide these, they'll just land on a blank page. But it's entirely up to you how you structure this to work with your application. So we are going to redirect the user to article.php with an ID of, and then we'll just concatenate on the article like so. Cool, so let's take a look if this actually works. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit Let's test all of these. We know that if one works, the other's likely to work. We'll test each one though. And inside of our database, we should see articles added, records added to this. So let's hit 1. Okay, so that's brought us straight back. That looks like it worked. It redirected us straight back. It was so quick that we didn't see it. Let's give this a refresh, and there we go. So we've got article 1 with a rating of 1. Let's do 2, 3, 4, and 5. They should now appear in the database as well. Cool, that looks like it worked. Let's go back and let's choose a second article, and we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 again. And let's again check that that was stored. And you can see that it's article 2 and the rating has been stored there. So now what we need to do, this is the more complicated bit. We need to basically join this table to this table, taking into account the ID here, matching the ID here. So this at first might seem a little bit more complicated than it actually is. So let's focus first on the index page. So we've already got some article ratings in there. Let's just give maybe the first article a couple more ratings. So we'll give it a couple of 4s, a couple of 5s, a 1, and maybe a 3. So we've got a nice variety of ratings in there. So on the home page now, we want to turn this X into the actual rating out of 5. So let's do this now. So inside of index, we need to modify this query here. So let's just get rid of this and start again. So what we need to do is we need to take into account the fact that we're working from 2 tables. So instead, what we're going to do is this time we're going to select the specific fields that we need rather than everything, because you could be storing the body against these articles as well, which you wouldn't want to pull in. So we're going to select articles.id, which is the same as saying select the ID column from the articles table. We also want articles.title as well. That's all we need. But now what we want to do is select the rating. So how are we going to pull this in? Well, I'm going to comma separate this. I'm going to use the average function in MySQL. And I'm going to choose the table name, much like we've done with this here. And I'm going to say .rating. So what this is now doing is it's pulling in the rating here, the average rating from this table. So we can call this something. So I'm going to call this rating, just so we don't have to muck around when we pull this in with PHP. We can just use the rating property that will be available. So I'm going to select this from articles. We also then need to join this, because otherwise it's not going to know what to do. We're going to do a left join because the article always exists, but the rating might not exist. So you can obviously always have an article, but you might not necessarily have a rating. So we're going to left join and then choose the table that we want to join on, which is articles ratings. And then we want to say which fields that we want to join on. So in this case, we're matching up the articles ID field, so that's this field here. We want to match that with the articles ratings.article field. So we're going to say on articles.id equals articles ratings.article. This could be called article ID for simplicity. It's entirely up to you. And then what we're going to be doing is grouping this by the articles ID. So now this is going to look a little bit different. Let's just check that the query works first of all. Okay, it doesn't seem to have worked, so let's check it out. Okay, so it looks like we missed off an S on this one. So that should work. Perfect. So we now should have the average rating based on that join. So down here, instead of X, we can replace that. We're already looping through these results, remember. We can replace that with article rating. Now remember, we chose the average as rating, meaning we can just use the rating property. So let's check this out. Cool, so it looks a little bit strange because obviously we're pulling in ratings here. We need to round these. This will also solve the problem of this being completely blank, and this will round this to a 0 by default. So we've got this actual rating here. Let's just click a couple more times on 5 just to bump that rating up a little bit. So you can see now that it's gone up to 4.1. Let's do a round on this. So we just use the round function in PHP and we round that off. So that will round down to 4. Perfect. And that will round down to 3. This has been effectively rounded to 0. So now that we have that, we can basically duplicate what we've done here and we can put that on our article page. So we are going to get rid of this. We'll pull this down a little bit here. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing with a slight adjustment, obviously, because we are selecting a specific article. So we don't need to group. We're just going to say where articles.id equals, and then we're going to pass in that ID that we got from up here. So we're doing the same thing here. Let's just check that this works. Cool, looks like everything's fine. Now what we're going to do though is we're going to replace that X again with the rating. So we're going to echo out article rating, and we should see that like that, and we'll go ahead and just round that off like so. And there we go. So let's check this article out, and you can see obviously we have a rating of 0. Let's hit 5. You know that that's going to go to 5. We hit 1. We know that that's going to go to 3. And we can hit 2 and 4 and maybe a load of 5s. That just brings that up. So what we're not doing in this tutorial is we're not checking the amount of times a user has actually pressed a rating. Now you can integrate this in your completely your own way within your application. Because you're storing article ratings separately, this makes it really easy to store the user's ID along with the rating, and then you could create a similar query to check how many times a user has rated a specific article. So what you could do is you could say, well, has that user rated article 1? And if so, then you can disallow the rating. You could also maybe show who's rated this specific article, and you can also do a count to show how many times that specific article has been rated. So for example, you could have rating 3 out of 5 based on 5 ratings or based on 10 ratings. So there's a lot that you can do in terms of expanding this. The code we've written is a little bit verbose and it's not entirely perfect, but this gives you a really good idea of the general concept behind implementing a rating system on your website.